Welcome to the September 2025 REDCap Lunch, Learn, and Collaborate. I'm Marcelina, and I'm one of the REDCap administrators that we have. Just to jump right in and talk about some statistics, let me hide this so that I can see the statistics. We currently have roughly 545 active projects, split within production and development. 9 projects with Mozio, but I'm not sure if some of those have been deactivated already because they've been transferred over to ITS REDCap. And then our active users are roughly 630 in Med. And then this slide is slightly different just because it's ITS REDCap, but it mostly looks the same. We're slowly increasing our active number of projects in ITS REDCap, which means the project migration is going. We have 3 projects with Mozio on ITS REDCap, and then we also have 225 active users on there. And now we officially have, we're able to add external institution users. And so those are rapidly growing. So if you have any external users from Med REDCap that you'd like to migrate over to ITS REDCap, please let us know. So a couple of announcements. We are getting the migration of the ITS REDCap projects. The deadline for that is November 17th. If you cannot fulfill that within the deadline before November 17th, please fill out a migration extension project. The deadline for migrating those extension approved projects is August 31st, 2026. So if you've submitted a migration extension request and it goes past that, we do have that limit of only approving those that have been that are able to be migrated before August 31st, 2026. That's when we will no longer have access to the College of Med REDCap. If you would like to request your migration extension because you cannot make the November 17th deadline, but you can make the August 31st, 2026 deadline, please fill out the survey below, and Alex will be putting in the survey links, I believe, at the end of our presentation. Okay, so for housekeeping notes, since we are doing it as a webinar, raise your hand during Q&A portions, or you can type your question in the Q&A space on Zoom, and we'll be able to answer those questions within that time frame. So the last bit about the migration of projects, you can't continue working on your Med REDCap project while you're migrating it to ITS REDCap. We're trying to set those to offline once they've been successfully tested, but we do need you to let us know once it has been successfully tested, and a full stop happens when you are ready to move it into production in ITS REDCap, and we'll actually prompt you and ask you if what the PIDs for the ITS REDCap projects are. If you have questions about project migration, feel free to send an email to redcap@fsu.edu, but we also have some Q&A documentation on our frequently asked questions space here at this website. If you, depending on where you are in the migration waves, we have designated REDCap admins for each of you. If you need assistance moving forward. And I think we've let everyone know within that September window that can start migrating, and we will be sending out notification if you are in our October window, and then our November window, I think, is very limited to the Mozio projects. So it should be, you'll either get a notification, you'll have already gotten a notification, or you will get a notification very shortly. Okay, so that's all preamble for our actual presentation today by Jacob. And you've heard him talk, at least within the last couple of Lunch, Learn, and Collaborates, but definitely more so if you've been in the FSU REDCap community for longer. And he's going to talk today about the project migration lessons learned as he's gone through that process. So this is a little bit of background about Jacob Stocks. He's graduated from UNC Chapel Hill. The day-to-day work is focused on data, and then he also enjoys woodworking. So I will stop screen sharing, and then we'll start Jacob's presentation. So welcome, Jacob.
Thanks, Marcelina. And I am recovering from a cold or something, so apologies for the voice, and also if I cough a couple times throughout the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and start screen sharing. Can folks see the title slide for the presentation? Great. So, like Marcelina mentioned, just presenting on some of our lessons learned from moving over our REDCap projects within the Institute on Digital Health and Innovation, or IDHI. And before I get into it, I just want to send a special thanks to my colleague Anjali, who shared in moving over all of these projects, troubleshooting, problem solving throughout the process, and also helping to generate ideas for today's presentation. So let me just minimize the Zoom portion. So a little bit about IDHI and kind of our REDCap perspective. So we are housed within the College of Nursing, remote research group, using REDCap very heavily for our data collection efforts with participants in randomized control trials, cohort studies, small scale formative work. We kind of have a range of topic areas, a range of project sizes and scopes that existed in the College of Medicine version um, of REDCap, and that needed to be moved over to ITS as part of the migration. So we had a total of 25 College of Medicine and REDCap projects that existed prior to the migration. Luckily, based on some of the just life cycles of those studies, getting towards data analysis only, not needing to collect additional data, we only needed to move over 7 REDCap projects to ITS, and the remaining 18 will be closing out, exporting final analytic data sets, doing any data cleaning, resolving any queries, but they won't need to move over to the new ITS REDCap for future support. Our projects include a range of REDCap features. So we have alerts and notifications, as well as automated survey invitations that are going out to participants. Also alerts that go to staff as participants complete actions or engage with the REDCap software or surveys. We have data access groups for multi-site trials, so siloing off users so they can only see certain records or certain aspects of the REDCap project based on their site, based on their user permissions. We do have external users. We had, I think in total, about 150 sponsored external users over time in College of Medicine. So far, we've gotten about 15 or so set up in 10 to 15 or so set up in ITS as we've migrated projects over. We also commonly use reports embedded within REDCap, custom record status dashboards as well. We have one project that is using Mocio and had to migrate that one over, so we have some experience there with the transition. And then we also have some surveys with embedded images, which was a consideration for migration, so like a pain scale or an image to help participants reference some idea as they're completing and responding to questions. We have a handful of external modules that we typically employ for our projects. I think most of our projects have at least one external module enabled, if not 3 or 4. So we had to take stock of that and think about how that would impact our transition and moving those over as part of migration. And then lastly, we do use eConsent. And if you've moved your projects over, if you've looked at ITS REDCap, there are some changes to the eConsent framework as REDCap has been migrated or upgraded from 14.6 or whatever College of Medicine is to 15.0 and beyond. They've had some revisions to the eConsent framework, which we had to adapt to as part of migration as well. And just a note on scale, excuse me, our projects range anywhere from 100 records up to 25,000 records. So we had unique challenges or things that we came across as part of moving those projects over depending on their scale. So I wanted to start with kind of the good, the things that went smoothly, the things that went well as part of the migration process, and then we'll move into things that went less well, and kind of lessons learned from there. So things that went smoothly as part of the process, the XML export and import approach that Mark and the REDCap admin team has described as the process for moving things over, worked well for us for certain projects, but not all of our projects. For projects that had fewer records, so not that 25,000 record project, and for ones that had smaller surveys, less complex surveys, shorter surveys, fewer fields, the XML export and import worked perfectly fine. All the programming moved over, the data moved over, and it was really just a matter of kind of spot checking, testing a few things, and then moving it into production. So that worked really well for our smaller scale projects, but not necessarily some of our larger, more complex projects. In our experience, the one project that we had a Mocio transition for went smoothly. There was no API request on the part, like interfacing with FSU REDCap admin. For those who are experienced with Mocio, there's an API token in the Mocio dashboard. We copied and pasted that into our new ITS project, disabled it in the old College of Medicine project, and then SMS started to go out as planned. Really not big lift there or any issues that we've run into to date with updating Mocio and transitioning it from College of Medicine to ITS. When it comes to our external modules, that was really just a matter of identifying what we were using and then submitting that request via the request link, the request portal to REDCap admin for them to enable it in our new projects. And they actioned those requests very quickly, and we didn't have any issues and haven't noticed any functionality issues with our new ITS projects and any kind of upgrades that might have changed from College of Medicine to ITS. None of those have impacted the use of our external modules that we've noticed so far to date. Similarly, we do have a couple of studies that use an API integration with our mHealth interventions. And so our app developers integrate with the REDCap project directly to understand and to kind of keep track of participants as they complete surveys, to distribute incentives and things like that. The API reconfiguration between College of Medicine to ITS went really smoothly. The streamlined request form, where you just say, yes, this was previously an API token that I had from College of Medicine, um, helped to kind of cut down on the information our app developers needed to provide to get new API tokens. And then the reconfiguration process for them, again, in our experience, was straightforward and has worked. All of those processes and those automations have kicked in and been working properly or as expected in our new ITS projects. And we had to do that for two separate REDCap migrations of our 7 that we moved over. Setting up user rights, creating data access groups, all of that was very similar across College of Medicine to ITS. Like I mentioned, we have a lot of multi-site studies, a lot of external users. Getting those folks new accounts was straightforward. Didn't run into any issues with getting those external user accounts set up. There was one slight difference in user rights between College of Medicine and ITS, and that was around the logging. It's now disaggregated in ITS as logging and email logging. So that's just one user right checkbox that you would say yes or no to for a given individual. So we had to keep an eye on that. But otherwise, user rights were pretty standard and didn't really run into any issues with people being able to access the project, access certain forms or records as they had been able to previously, and how they would typically expect to be able to engage with the REDCap projects. Again, adding external users, straightforward process. The sponsored user request form worked well, was actioned quickly by REDCap admin, and folks on our participating sites didn't have any issue getting into the new redcap.fsu.edu. And I kind of got ahead of myself, but data access groups, similarly, straightforward. The silos are working. Folks are able to be sorted properly. No issues there. And our custom record status dashboards are identical in their interface and filtering and sorting data in the same way that things had been working previously. And then I think this is the last point here with the eConsent framework. It is a bit different. So previously, if you've used eConsent in College of Medicine, REDCap, you would have set that up in your specific survey instrument settings and enabled the eConsent framework and done the file repository and all of that. In ITS, it's a little bit different. So we did have to go in and manually kind of update our eConsent framework settings, but that was very straightforward. And the new version actually is really helpful and really useful for version control and makes that a bit easier and a bit more straightforward in kind of configuring the eConsent survey itself. So really no issues there, just a matter of actively going in and updating that settings, given the kind of change between 14.0 and 15.0. So a lot of great things, a lot of things went smoothly in our process. Though we did obviously run into some challenges. And so I'll kind of talk about those less good things as part of our experience migrating from College of Medicine to ITS. So first, we had a bit of issue, like I mentioned, with our larger, more complex projects. So the XML export from College of Medicine and simple import into ITS didn't work when that file size got too large. So for our projects that had, 25,000 records, it failed. That upload wasn't going to work. And so we had to kind of have some workarounds for that. And the solution that we came up with was to export the programming itself, leave the data as kind of a separate step. And then once we got the kind of the framework and the structure of the project imported over into into ITS, then we could do either instrument by instrument or a chunk of records at a time data imports to replace or replenish all of our 25,000 records between the two projects. So it took a little bit of time, not just a simple export import, but not a huge hurdle in the grand scheme of things. And just I have some screenshots kind of embedded throughout the next few slides so you can see what it looks like in REDCap and know where to go or know where to look, what to look for, and able to be able to do these things. And so in that project setup, other functionality tab that Mark has shown in previous Lunch Learn and Collaborates, you can opt to download the metadata only, which is the programming, the alerts and notifications, kind of the framework or the structure of your project, or you can do it with metadata and data. This is what crashed it when we had 25,000 records. It just wouldn't work. We were able to export, but we couldn't then import into ITS. And so we did just the metadata only with all of these checkboxes enabled. So all of the structure and the large pieces, kind of the building blocks of our project were there, and we just had to handle the data separately. If you have a project that even with doing the metadata only and all of these things check boxes still too large, you can kind of play around with unchecking some of these to see what elements push that file over the limit and what could be imported separately kind of piecemeal so that you can then get everything over and not have to do kind of a full Frankensteining of your project back together. The other kind of approach or instance where the XML import export failed for us was smaller scale when it comes to number of records. I think that project had only about 500, but we had a handful of surveys that were extremely long. So they had anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 items or variables per survey per multiple time points. So again, a lot of data, a lot of information really pushed that file size, the XML file up and made it fail when we tried to import. In that instance, it was a bit more of a piece by piece kind of reconstruction of the project. We couldn't use the XML import whatsoever. We had to import our data dictionary over, and then import our alerts and notifications. But there are throughout the REDCap project in the College of Medicine instance and also in ITS, places where you can export entire elements. So similarly, where you have these checkboxes for user roles or alerts and notifications or survey settings, which would be your data dictionary, you can export pieces or components of your College of Medicine project and import them individually. Smaller file sizes should have less issues with crashing or not being able to upload successfully. And that way you're not having to start from scratch and reprogram every single alert, reprogram every single survey and every item and response option. You're doing it kind of in smaller chunks. But to knock out each of those kind of key pieces. So I pulled a screenshot from the various areas that we had to upload. So obviously the data dictionary for your surveys and your case report forms and the programming there. Our alerts, we had, I think for this project somewhere like 60, 65. So we didn't want to have to reprogram all of those, but we could just export the programming, move it over. User roles and assignments, data access groups, and then also our survey queue for our participants as they're completing and going through steps of their different instruments. So a little bit of a hurdle, two different kind of scenarios, two different contexts, required two different solutions, but still didn't have to, start from scratch and reprogram every single element. We're able to kind of do it in bits and pieces to get it across between the two instances. One thing to remember as you are doing this, if you're not able to do the full XML export import over between the systems, keep an eye on your file repository because that is something that if you had e-consents that were auto-saving there, you'll need to go there and download and then import into your ITS project. Similarly, there is no good functionality for exporting reports unless you can get it as part of an XML file. There's no kind of CSV download option. So we did have to manually reconstruct those, which was a bit of a time sink, but was part of the process. And also keep in mind that if your various users have report creation ability or they can use the data exports, reports, and stats tool, you can set those so they're not viewable to other individuals. So from your perspective, you may see 10 reports, but in a given project, 15 may exist if other users have created reports that you don't see. So definitely check with your users, your site staff as you are moving things over to make sure that all of the components, whether you can see them or not from kind of the data manager perspective, are being transitioned over and nothing's lost before you kind of close out the College of Medicine version of your projects. Similarly, for custom record status dashboards, we did have to manually reconstruct those in this one instance because we weren't able to carry them over in the XML file, and there's not a bulk export way of doing that. And then obviously the data. In the case of 25,000 records, we couldn't just export one file and throw all 25,000 records in. We actually treated it an instrument at a time across the 25,000 records, and that seemed to work. Other approaches, you could do record 1 to 5,000, 5,001 to 10,000, depending on, what chunks work successfully for you. The next issue that we ran into were attachments kind of embedded throughout our REDCap projects. So when exporting the XML file, you do actually get an error message that will pop up and notify you of those, or you should get that prompt to say like, hey, there are attachments embedded throughout your instruments, either in your alerts and notifications like email attachments, or at the end of the survey, if you attach a document for a participant to look at or download or keep, those will not transfer over. And REDCap tells you where those are and what they're labeled, and that gives you kind of a quick glance to go and move them over. That is something that we had to do manually, and that's regardless of whether you use the XML approach or if you're having to kind of piecemeal your projects together otherwise. These occurred for us in our survey settings. So you can add attachments at the end of a survey setting, like when they complete a survey, it auto emails them their responses or something along those lines. So that was one place where we had to fix our attachments. And then also in our alerts and notifications. For some of our studies, we like to give participants, when they screen, we'll send them an email saying, hey, you're eligible. Here are the next steps. And we give them a little diagram kind of showing the flow of that next step. And that attachment had to be replaced in that alert and notification. So just keep an eye kind of throughout your projects on where you add in those kinds of things, and you will have to manually replace those. Similarly with survey images, so if you have embedded survey images like a pain scale or a study logo or some other image that you drop in as part of the designer when you're constructing your instrument, whether it's a survey or um, a, a form or a case report form, those are saved on the server attached to in the College of Medicine instance, like the redcap.med.fsu.edu hyperlink. And so when you move your XML import over, or if you just take your data dictionary, export it and import it over, those images won't be carried over because the programming or the kind of the back end recognizes the redcap.med.fsu.edu hyperlink, not the new redcap.fsu.edu link. And I've taken a screenshot here of one of our data dictionaries. So this is the variable name. This is the instrument that it lives in. It's a descriptive text field. And this is the hyperlink here for where the actual image that's displayed in the survey is saved. And so you can see here, I highlighted in red, this is after I updated it to be associated with the new ITS instance. Previously, this had said something redcap.med and had some other additional specifications in the hyperlink. So to do this, you would either delete the image that the kind of the placeholder for the image that was there in your descriptive text field or whatever field it was, and then re-upload, and that will save it with a new hyperlink. And if you then download your data dictionary, it'll have the corrected um, email, web address here for your images, and they should display properly. Shouldn't have any issues with folks not seeing what you want them to see. In this case, it was kind of a repeated picture throughout a very lengthy survey. So in this, I just have a note here for if you do have repeated images, you can go in and go into the designer and just swap out those images like you normally would using kind of the designer interface. But if you have 20 like we did, I found it easier to just kind of control all and replace those in the data dictionary Excel file and then re-import that CSV, and all of the changes were made kind of in one go. So keep an eye on any survey images or embedded kind of documentation that you have in that way. Those links will need to be changed again, regardless of whether it's the XML or other approach to move from one instance to the next. Survey settings was another place that needed to be updated manually. So like the elements of the look and feel of your surveys, if you had study logos like we had, you can see our EPIC study, which is a CDC funded study here. We have that logo uh, embedded at the top of each of our pages on a given baseline survey or follow-up survey. That had to be re-added after the import. And then also any color schemes that you might have kind of pre-populated for your different studies to match your different logos. Those had to be reconstructed in the survey settings, and they weren't carried over from Med to ITS. So a bit of a minor thing there, but the look and feel, the user interface, the aesthetic of your instruments is certainly important to you. That's why you developed it in the first place, if you had it. And so just keep in mind that you want to carry that over and kind of go through instrument by instrument to make sure your survey settings did carry over properly. So one of the bit bigger hurdles when it came to um, kind of reconfigure our project so that we were ready for relaunch after the data pause while migration was ongoing was the use of automated survey invitations. So if folks aren't familiar with automated survey invitations, it's in the designer. It's something you can use to queue up to send out a survey link to folks to a designated communication field, most likely email field, unless you're using Mocio, it could be SMS. And these we often use in our work for follow-up surveys. So if someone enrolls on, what's today, the 23rd or 24th, and we have a 3-month survey, we use those automated survey invitations to delay the send of that reminder. So when they enter their target window, 90 days from now, we want them to get that reminder to complete their 3-month survey. And so we use automated survey invitations a lot for that. So they're kind of delayed in their sending. REDCap queues them up when the necessary or appropriate branching logic that we define is met, but then it will delay the send based on what we specify, the number of days from enrollment, et cetera, et cetera. So when you do the XML export and import into ITS REDCap, REDCap won't automatically queue up, or at least in our experience, it did not automatically queue up those future ASIs to go out to participants. We had to explicitly reevaluate in the designer the ASIs per instrument so that REDCap evaluated the logic associated with the record and with the automated invitation, determined if an alert needed to be queued up for that individual, and then queued it up and any additional reminders. So that action didn't happen automatically, though in the designer it looks like it would have happened because you get a little green check at the bottom of your ASI button. For those who are familiar, you know what I'm talking about. Um, but it wasn't going to queue up. If you looked at your email invitation log and you could see future invitations, none were there until we reevaluated the ASI like manually reevaluated after import of the XML file. So you will need to actively do that. Um, but one thing to consider is You want to make sure that those alerts are queued up for the right people at the right time. And especially if you had a project that underwent a data pause, so it previous to, prior to migration, it was actively collecting data. You pause data collection to undergo migration, and then you're going to relaunch data collection. Because the system doesn't maintain that kind of institutional knowledge of like what happened in the College of Medicine version when you export it over into this new ITS REDCap instance, it may re-trigger alerts to folks that have already received reminders for a previous survey depending on what your logic statements say. So if the logic statement evaluates as true and the system says, hey, I need to send this alert, and it doesn't recognize that it had already sent an alert to this person, which it won't know because that happened in College of Medicine, not in ITS, you may need to just adjust your logic statements or that branching logic to make sure that alerts are not going out to people, you're not spamming people with past action items that they've already completed or missed their window for, and you only want that future action to be happening. So we had to spend some time kind of thinking through our logic statements and what adjustments may need, what were needed, so that we didn't retroactively send an alert to someone that had already received it or didn't need to receive it for prospective data collection. So you can see this is a long-ish branching logic statement, but pretty straightforward. So the portion up until here, the enrollment variable, so they're marked as one, they're marked as enrolled, and they have consented to the project in one of our two versions of the consent form, and they have not been study stopped for any reason. That was the original logic statement that we had for our follow-up surveys. So these conditions had to be met. They had to be marked, consented, and not study stopped. And then REDCap would send them an alert 90 days after their date of enrollment for their 3-month survey. However, these could be true for someone, and they could have, in the College of Medicine version, have been sent that 90-day reminder, but now we're 180 days into their study participation. We've undergone our data pause, our migration. This logic was still evaluated as true, and REDCap would still queue up that automated survey invitation had we not added this additional statement here to kind of condition down or restrict down those folks so it was only prospective actions or folks who are still in their window to actually receive their alerts. So we added a statement here that their month 3 survey had not been marked as complete and that the date difference between their enrollment date and today was somewhere between 90 days, greater than equal to 90, and less than equal to 120. Because for our studies, we use like kind of a 30-day window once they enter their target date. So this helped to limit down folks who were actively in window, had not already completed their survey, and did actually prospectively need to receive the alert or notification, or sorry, the automated survey invitation. And that has helped, and we've kind of been keeping track of it. And it seems to have worked properly to not retroactively send folks or mistakenly send folks alerts that we didn't want them to be sent because we had to reevaluate the ASIs. A lot of talking there, but hopefully that made sense, and I'll send slides around, and folks can certainly ask questions at the end if you do need any clarification. Similarly, so our alerts and notifications are one thing. Our automated survey invitations we typically use for participant-facing communication for those survey reminders. Our alerts and notifications we typically use for staff-facing communication. So when someone completes a survey, we send an alert to staff being like, X record has completed X follow-up visit. Please pay them their incentive or whatever it might be. And so we had to consider again, do we need to reevaluate our alerts that were going towards staff and not towards participants, or should they work fine moving forward? Do we need to change anything about them? So it very much depends on how you use and how you've programmed your alerts and notifications if you will need to reevaluate them. In our case, we decided not to because again, REDCap doesn't, the ITS instance of your project doesn't know what records previously had an alert triggered for them, whereas the College of Medicine version has that kind of record in the back end. And so had we just reevaluated all of our alerts for our cohort project of 3,100 individuals and 25,000 records, REDCap would have blasted our study staff with 25,000 survey completions or nudges or reminders or things that had previously been sent to them that obviously don't make sense to be sent to them again, but REDCap doesn't know that. The project doesn't know that. And so we just decided to not reevaluate those alerts and notifications. And instead, we disabled them as part of our kind of data import process, imported all of our data over so they weren't being triggered kind of as the migration was happening, and then re-enabled them so that prospectively um, they would be triggered as logic statements became true, as they typically had functioned in the College of Medicine version. But we didn't want things to go out to staff, one, as we were importing data, or retroactively in instances where it didn't make sense or it had already happened, and we didn't want it to go out again. So definitely some kind of order of operation considerations, and definitely some thinking about what your project was intended to do, how it was set up to work, and how the migration and reevaluating or re-enabling these elements, what it will do when you actually do that, and what that means for your users of the project, the staff, but also for your participants, and just be very careful about how you go about that. Keep, monitoring it actively post migration, when you relaunch data collection, that it is working how you had expected it to work and how it had been previously working. So yeah, definitely a lot to consider there, especially around alerts and notifications and automated survey invitations, because we don't want to bombard participants and make them frustrated, and make them disengage because a system error or an oversight on our part. One last, I think this is the last one, minor validation issue we ran into. So one of our instruments was collecting contact information in the form of a phone number. And so we were using it was a text field with a phone number validation so that they entered it properly and didn't just put in 1, 2, 3, 4. But when we went to go import that data, REDCap, for just a handful, it was less than 1% of our records, it threw us an error message saying that the phone number was not entered in the proper format, that it didn't follow the 10-digit phone number kind of validation that the instrument was using or the field was using. And so it couldn't successfully do the data import. And it did fail and would not let us proceed with the data of any of the other associated data in the CSV file because of that error message. Anjali and I looked, the phone numbers were in the right format, valid area codes. Like, it was a very odd situation, one that we really didn't have a clear understanding as to why it had happened. But the workaround that we came up with was to disable the field validation prior to import the data, and then re-enable the field validation to validate that 10-digit phone number. And that seemed to work. It was a bit of an odd scenario. Again, it happened for less than 1% of our records across the two projects where this was an issue, but did kind of pop up unexpectedly. So if you do have validations of other types, whether it's integer or number or email or zip code, you may encounter something similar. And likely you could follow a similar process of disabling the validation, uploading the data, re-enabling the validation, and it shouldn't give you an error message or have any issues moving forward. So we did have a few even less good things that we kind of ran into that are either persistent issues or were larger hurdles or had just kind of broader implications for our work and the way that we typically had employed and used our REDCap projects. So I'll talk about those few here, and that will kind of wrap things up for me, and I'll open up to any questions. But the very first one, and it remains unresolved, and certainly Marcelina or folks can speak to kind of workarounds that they're implementing or trying to pursue. But typically for our studies, we like to employ a study email address. And this just helps to direct communication to one central inbox that multiple staff members have access to, kind of using the name of the study, like epic@nursing.fsu.edu. So that way folks can just communicate there instead of giving out individual staff or PI contact information. And we typically associate these with users in our REDCap projects. That way we can select them from the dropdowns for any of our automated survey invitations or our alerts and notifications. The email to the participant appears to come from that email address. They're familiar with it, they're comfortable with it, they know it's not spam. It doesn't go to their spam once they kind of first engage with it. And that has been a common practice across all of our projects. And so the thing that we've run into with the ITS version of REDCap is it does not allow us to, in practice, actually use those kind of email address from fields. We're able to select it in the dropdown, and it on our end kind of programmatically appears like it will be sending from the right address, the one that we want it to send to. But then when you actually test it or a participant receives the email, it comes from this do not reply at fsu.edu email address. Which as we were testing projects, this is an example email that I sent to myself for one of our collaborators projects. And you can see it went to my email address, my FSU email address, but it came from do not reply at fsu.edu. And the first couple of times I tested this, it went to my spam, and I just thought I wasn't receiving the emails at all because from my perspective, it was supposed to come from that study email address that my Outlook was familiar with and should not filter out, but it was filtering it out and sending it to spam until I recognized that, and then it just continues to come from that do not reply email address. So that has been an issue for us with participant communication. It does remain an issue. I do know that REDCap admin is working to do something with the inboxes to allow kind of on the back end those addresses to show up. You can certainly CC your study email address or generic inboxes on the communication. So you could have a to your given participant and then CC that field. But just functionally, it kind of operates a bit different and still gets filtered out if to spam that do not reply. At least in our experience, it has. And so that's one thing that we're still working with REDCap admin to resolve, but that might be an issue that you encounter for your projects. So for any alerts and notifications, any automated survey invitations that are being sent out by REDCap, they're going to be received from your participants from the do not reply email address, regardless of how it appears on your end. At least that's been our experience. And this is probably the biggest hurdle that we've really encountered throughout this process, has been the fact that the survey data, the data that's imported, regardless of the method, so regardless of your approach to migration, whether you're able to do the XML export and import across systems, or if you have to kind of Frankenstein it together, like what we did for a couple of ours with the data import tool. Regardless, it's been our experience that REDCap does not recognize that data, that survey data, as survey data. So if folks are familiar with the record status dashboard, you'll know that the different emblems here mean different things. So a green circle, an empty green circle, is a completed form. So just taking instruments in REDCap, it can either be forms or surveys, and have different functionalities. So the green circle is a completed form. In our case, we use this for case report forms that are completed by staff. A red empty circle is a incomplete form, whereas a greenish orange, or sorry, yellowish orange circle with a check is a partially complete survey, or a green circle with a check is a completed survey. You'll notice that when you do your XML imports, at least when we did them, or when we do data uploads via the data import tool, everything comes in with this red or green empty circle. So REDCap is recognizing that data as form data and not survey data, which has implications downstream for programmatic elements of your project. At least it had for ours. So the two issues that we ran into were the capturing of the survey completion timestamp data. This is a weird artifact of REDCap I don't really understand, but for those of you who have ever exported data from REDCap, you'll notice that in the export you can specify a couple of like additional fields that will populate as part of that aren't necessarily ones that you programmed as part of your survey or your CRF. And one common one is the survey completion timestamp. So as folks are completing their surveys, REDCap automatically saves the date and time when they finished and submitted that form. And that's really useful information for us because we condition things like incentive alerts, or we have certain monitoring reports that we run that are looking at that data, that survey data completion field, and keeping track of how many completions do we have in a week or in a month, or the order of completions and the time between completions. So we really rely on and use that completion timestamp field a lot. And you, when it's not recognized as survey data, when it's form data, you lose that ability. So when you go to move data over from College of Medicine to ITS, use that export if it has the like a baseline survey timestamp variable because it's not a recognized variable in your project until REDCap on the back end kind of automatically creates it. So what we had to do was create a dummy variable so that we could capture that useful information from College of Medicine into ITS and just rename kind of what it was. So I think we called it baseline underscore comp time. And then in the export that we got from College of Medicine, we changed the variable name, that very first row in the export to the new variable name, the dummy variable name we had created for ITS, and then imported it over, and that allowed us to capture that completion timestamp. But there was no other workaround that we were able to come up with to get REDCap to actually recognize survey data as survey data. So I don't know if admin folks have anything they can speak to there afterwards, but that would be a really important piece for us for our kind of future uses of survey data, of our data in our REDCap projects. The other kind of consideration when REDCap doesn't recognize your survey data as such is your ability or inability to use smart variables. So smart variables, we don't use them all that often. Some of you may not have any clue what I'm talking about, but these are variables that you can use within REDCap that kind of pull metadata or backend data and pipe it into different places, or you can incorporate it into your branching logic statements throughout your programming, throughout your REDCap projects. And because REDCap doesn't recognize the survey as a survey, you lose that functionality. So one use case that we had previously employed for some of our follow-up surveys was we would have a statement kind of at the beginning of the set of questions saying, at your last survey on X date, you reported this to us. Has this changed? And we would use a smart variable there and we would pipe in the date of last survey completion. So it would have been the survey date completed, and we would colon the instrument, whatever the last instrument was that they should have completed, like their baseline survey, if they were completing their 3-month follow-up. We had to change those branching logic statements and completely remove smart variables in order to be able to have a similar approach and a similar kind of framing of that item for our participants. So we had to instead reference our dummy variables here that we had previously constructed in order to pipe that into the statement of at your last survey on X date, yada, yada, yada. So just know that there are lots of different ways you can use smart variables. That's just one way we had used it and kind of came across the issue. But if you use them for survey start time, end time, start date, completion date, duration of survey completion, if you're tracking how long it takes someone to do a survey, all of those elements won't be functional if REDCap doesn't acknowledge your data as surveyed data. And in our experience with the XML export import, it didn't do that. And so we lost that functionality. Prospectively, as people complete surveys, it'll work fine because as long as the project moving forward is, that instrument is enabled as a survey, it will collect it as survey data and give you that green check mark as they complete it. But for any of that retrospective data that previously existed in your College of Medicine version, we've not found a workaround to kind of re-enable or readjust that framing from a REDCap perspective. So that was a bit of an issue and a bit of a hurdle for us as we were moving our projects over from College of Medicine to ITS. So the last note I'll have here, and this is the last slide, is just a reminder to review and test and meet with your teams. There are, in some instances for us, it was a very simple download the XML file, import it over, good to go with a couple short spot checks. But in reality, that it wasn't that straightforward. It wasn't that simple. We did have to go into detail into each of the features that we used, external modules, reports, and we want to make sure that the project is working as intended as it had previously. And that just requires, an active review, a manual review of your projects. Also testing certain features, testing your alerts and notifications, testing your logic statements, testing your surveys is really, really important before you relaunch and exit that data pause if you had to have one. And then similarly for our one of our studies, we have a standing meeting with our coordinators on Monday, and we go through and review each of the elements of the project, of its functionality, of the new data pieces that were collected, the new participants that did things for our study, whether it was surveys or biospecimens or whatever, just to make sure that the functionality is still working. And what we're hoping for there is to see a few examples of each kind of scenario. So we want to see some ineligible participants and making sure that our branching logic in the screener is still working and evaluating people properly for eligibility. We want to see survey completion alerts going out to staff. We want to see reminders both via Mocio and via email going out to participants and making sure we have a few examples of all of those scenarios before we feel like, all right, we can kind of set it and forget it and let the project run on its own now that we're confident that the migration was successful, all the elements continue to work, and we don't have any glaring issues or things that need to be resolved. One thing that has been really, really helpful to facilitate that process and is not something that maybe everyone uses all that often are your logs in REDCap. So the logging feature, both for just general actions in the data system, as well as your survey distribution tools. There's a notification log to see what went out, when it went out, to what email address, to what phone number, what was the content of that email or SMS. You can see all of those things on the back end that are happening within REDCap. And so you know exactly what the system is doing. And then you can compare that with what you expect it to do. And is it meeting that or not? Or are things happening differently? Is something going wrong? Are there issues there? So that's really helpful and something I would highly recommend for folks is to look into your logs, look at your future and past notifications, look at how the system is queuing things up if you do have those sort of automations and those non-manual actions within your project to make sure that the things that you had previously set and forgot about are still working how you wanted them to work. So that is the end of my slides, and I will open up for questions and also just turn it back to Marcelina to facilitate.
Thank you. Let's see. I don't see any questions in the question and answer. Thank you, Jacob, for the presentation. I think Naomi's raising her hand though. So we can unmute Naomi. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for that presentation. That was great. I had a question about the larger projects that you were running into issues with the XML data. I attempted to upload our project piece by piece, like you mentioned, but I still was getting an error message that said like requested URL cannot be found. Did you guys also get a similar error message saying something like that? And did you just like break it down even further to avoid that? Thank you.
Yeah, we ran into a couple of issues with just this, again, still the size of the file being too large and it would time out on us or crash the import. The other piece where I think we had that specific language of like the requested URL not existing or something being weird there was when we tried to go and upload one of our attachments back to one of our alerts and the file name for the attachment had an apostrophe in it. So it was Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, so it had apostrophe S. And for whatever reason, that was causing an issue with the upload where it hadn't in the College of Medicine version. And so just removing that apostrophe in the attachment and the file name helped to resolve that issue. That was a very specific example for the attachments. Broadly for uploading like a data dictionary or uploading a CSV with our alerts and notifications or ASIs, we didn't run into any issues with like that kind of small, tweak or issue needing to be made. It was more just a file size issue. But I don't know if Marcelina, you have any thoughts on that.
No, I think, yeah, I agree with Jacob. Check your data and just make sure that that's like exactly what the error is. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes it is just that generic in terms of issue, but that's something that we can definitely look at together synchronously.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
We have a question from the Q&A.
Sure, yeah. I actually wanted to speak on the do not reply email addresses. The question was, do you know if that's also being blocked by other email servers besides Outlook like Gmail, Hotmail, or Yahoo? I do know of it being pushed to spam and Gmail in particular. We're currently, like Jacob said, like we are working on a workaround for this. And specifically for the projects that have like shared inboxes, in which like that's the typical procedure for the alerts and notifications. Let us know if that's something that you would like. I think we're switching, instead of to do not reply, we're switching it to REDCap at fsu.edu because that won't be blocked or sent to spam. But for those that have that shared inbox, we do have an allow list. It's just a situation with how the server itself is set up. But yeah, so if you send in a technical support request, we can enable that specific like shared inbox. We just have a limited amount of emails allowed on that list. The other, I know that on your end, in terms of alerts and notifications, you do see that the from email, you can set that. The other thing that we found in terms of testing is that if you select reply to that do not reply at FSU, like email notification, it will automatically change to that from email. And so if you want to, you can add an additional note in that alert notification, say like reply to this email, it will go to this email message, it'll go to the specific email. But we are still working through that for the emails, because we know that this is not something that was the standard procedure in Med REDCap. And then if we don't have any other questions, I can also speak to the data not being recognized as surveys. I know if people had contacted the REDCap team within the last week, we were at REDCap Con in Wisconsin, so we were able to get a lot of information, or a lot more information regarding project migration, as other universities are also going through this process. Some of them are merging multiple instances in their university to one instance, or they're transferring over like us from one instance to another. So something that they did mention is that the data not being recognized as surveys is a common issue. There is a way to do a data import in terms of getting that check mark back, or that yellow or I guess orange checkbox and the green checkbox. So that's something, if that's of interest, to maintain that across the Med REDCap version or the ITS version, but it is a manual process as opposed to an automatic. And then similarly, yes, those like timestamps for surveys. I think that the solution that you guys came up with, Jacob, and your team, like, is the solution that we would recommend, is to kind of make a dummy variable so that value is maintained across the export, because this also happens when other people are exporting their projects from one university and then importing into our university as well. So yeah, and then I think we're hoping to have more notes out within the next couple of weeks of what we got from the project migration, or from the REDCap Con, in terms of our project migration notes, and then anything else that we can do to kind of facilitate an easier workflow for the project migration. So thank you, Jacob, for your presentation. I will go back to screen sharing. Thank you. And then I'm hoping that that is showing up. Let's see. Okay. And then we did talk through questions of the migration. Are there any other questions? I don't see any raised hands or Q&A, but I will stop at the very, very end if we do have any more. Alex has just sent this in the chat, but here are a couple of different links. If you do have shared inboxes or emails that you'd like to add to the from emails in ITS REDCap, please send them to the technical support and just kind of add more details in terms of what your project is and your project ID. For user requests, I know that this is at redcap.med.fsu.edu, but it is to request either ITS users or med users. But there will be a little toggle that specifies which type of user you are requesting, whether it is for ITS or for med. As of now, if it is a new user that you were requesting for a new account, we're only allowing new users in ITS REDCap unless they're being added to an existing project on Med REDCap that'll finish their data collection before the end of the fall semester. And so sometimes if you do request an account and you're trying to find projects, just make sure that you're in the right REDCap instance, because I know that REDCap Med and REDCap ITS both look very similar. The URL is the one that's just slightly different. So yeah, like Jacob said, if you have an API in Med and you want an API in ITS, please fill out the API request survey. You can also fill out the API request survey if you want an API in Med. Again, there's going to be that little toggle that specifies which instance you're requesting it for. And then lastly, if you haven't gotten an email, you will be getting an email regarding the migration extension or migration notification that you're able to move over your project. These are mostly self-migrated projects, so if you need assistance, please let us know. And then if you're not able to complete the REDCap migration to ITS by November 17th, I believe, please fill out this survey, and then we're slowly working through this list to get back to you, but the last date that you were allowed to extend all the way up to is August 31st, 2026. So thank you everyone for attending our Lunch, Learn, and Collaborate. Our next meeting is going to be October 29th at 12:30. I think right now currently slotted for presenting is the REDCap team. So me, Mark, and Semi, we're going to do data visualization, but we're always open to volunteers if you'd like to present something, or if you'd like to also present your lessons learned within the migration, since that is very much a current event for all of us at FSU. And then if there's anything else REDCap wise that you'd like to discuss, let us know. So thank you so much.